Episode number 205 of CXOTalk. I'm Michael Krigsman. CXOTalk brings together the most interesting, innovative leaders in the world. These are people who are genuinely shaping the future. And I'm, again, Michael Krigsman. I am an industry analyst and the host of CXOTalk. Today, we're talking with a very interesting gentleman, an old friend, who is named Didier Bonnet, who is a senior exec at Capgemini, one of the largest consulting firms in the world. Didier is an author, he's a researcher, and we're going to be talking about digital transformation inside large companies. Didier Bonnet, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Glad to be with you.
Well, it's so good to see you again. The last time we spoke was about, what, 2 months ago?
2 months ago, yeah.
2 months ago when you were here in
2 months
Boston?
ago, yeah. Over dinner, yeah.
Over dinner. And so I'm so thrilled that you're here in CXO Talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Delighted.
So Didier, please tell us about Capgemini and tell us about your role at Capgemini.
Okay. So very briefly, I belong to the strategy and transformation arm of Capgemini, which is called Capgemini Consulting. It's about 3,500 consultants focused entirely on digital transformation. And of course, we're part of the bigger Capgemini group, with about $13 billion, 180,000 people worldwide, really delivering the technology that we're trying to shape as consultants. Within that, I run the digital transformation practice globally, and also responsible as the exec sponsor for our research partnership with the MIT.
So you spend a lot of time talking with large organizations, and you wrote a book. And why don't you tell us briefly about the book that you wrote as well, because I think that will feed into our conversation.
Okay, so I think the whole without going too far back in history, I mean, one of the things that surprised me, this is going back probably 2009, when I started really looking at this phenomenon, was most of the stuff that was written in the press, or that you could see even in research, was around industries that were really either tech industry or Apple or Google, or the music industry, the publishing industry. So all industry that I like, or company that I like, but altogether, these industry represents about 6% of the world economy. And I sort of said, if this phenomenon actually transfers to many more industry, which I believed at the time, then we have 94% of the world economy which is not looked at. And this 94% is composed of fairly large companies in very traditional industry, like pharmaceutical, like manufacturing, like banking, insurance, retail. So I really wanted to focus on really looking at what happened. How do they shape this transformation in large company? Because as you well know, large companies have been in existence for hundreds of years sometimes, with loads of legacy systems and organization, and therefore the transformation is a really complex endeavor. So we really focused on that, and I found a wonderful partner with the MIT that was willing to get along with the journey with us, and spent really 4 years trying to put some frameworks and understanding and data around what's happening in digital transformation in large firms, because in those days very few people were talking about digital transformation, but we really were focused on really shaping what does it actually mean, what areas of the firm does it actually cover, where do you actually start, what kind of capabilities do you need, and really the book is about exchanging and really conveying those frameworks, and in particular how you go about then evolving and changing your organization through digital technology. And the purpose was really to say, if we think what's happening right now in terms of technology is completely magical and superb, we ain't seen nothing yet. What's coming, and you know that very well, what's coming down the pipe with robotics, with artificial intelligence, is going to make this flow of technology even more amazing, and therefore the opportunity for businesses even bigger. But the only firms that will be able to leverage that are the firms that are able to really digitally transform themselves and have gone through a few cycles to really integrate this technology for business benefits. So that was really the story of how we, and so after 4 years, we published that book, and then since then we've continued drilling down into the topic in a more precise segment of the digital transformation journey.
So I remember when you were doing that research before you published the book, and at that time, digital transformation was a relatively new concept, and you were right on the cutting edge. Today, if we fast forward 4 years, digital transformation has become kind of this almost meaningless buzzword. Every marketing department, every business marketing department, it seems, has adopted the phrase, and it means whatever they want. And so from your standpoint, having been researching this and really one of the pioneers in this, what does digital transformation actually mean? If we strip away the jargon and the hype, what is digital transformation?
Yes. Yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, today, everybody was either selling a product or doing something with technology is, using the term digital transformation. And unfortunately, I couldn't come up with anything different, so I will stick with that for now. But to me, it has kept its original meaning. It's really, how do you fundamentally transform the business operation and the customer experience or the business model of a corporation through the use of digital technology? And the emphasis is really not so much on the beauty and the power of the technology, but more on its effect on organization for the benefit of the customer, or productivity or efficiency or whatever. So I still really, in my head, every time I talk to clients or I start to figure out a problem around that, really try to think in terms of connecting with my customers, which are themselves changing and getting more digital. About as you know, today the operational side is really taking great prominence with the Internet of Everything, but also automation and artificial intelligence, and also thinking about business model, because we're in a world where equally the word disruption is being bantered around all over the place. Everybody's getting disrupted. It's all about disruption, and really try to get behind that to say, okay, well, who is really getting disrupted, at what speed, and how do you defend as a large corporation against potential disruptors? Underlying all this, obviously, there's a big layer of what I would call a digital platforms, which is the next evolution of the IT platforms that needs to happen, and also a massive endeavor around analytics, because today we talk a lot about big data and analytics, but if you look at these large corporations, just getting to the point where you can get the data that you need, and then getting to the point where you can take that data and make different decisions is a massive endeavor for this. And I'm talking about multi-billion-dollar global organization that have got to go through these processes. So to me, the point of the exercise is really to understand, how can I really transform my organization through the use of digital technology, with the main goal being, can I actually move the needle on my bottom line or my top line, because that's what businesses are all about. I forgot to mention one thing, which is, I think I'd like to emphasize, which is equally important, is in all of this, I still have the fundamental belief that despite the fact that these transformations are really technology-based and very complex technologically, there is still a massive human element behind that. So organizations are made of people, and I think we have to understand that as part of the transformation, if you don't get your people on board, upgrade their skills, and really engage them in this transformation, usually it's not a good sign for succeeding in this kind of transformation. So that's kind of how I view the world. It's a pretty broad topic. Not everybody is trying to do floor to ceiling type of transformation. So you could start with the customer experience, or you could start with operations. But fundamentally, these technologies are really going to touch every single point of the organization. And to some extent, that's one of the messages that I send in the book, is that hence the need for a good strategy and a good vision, because you could spend a ton of money trying to change everything in your organization, because you can't truly change every part of your organization with digital technology. So one of the exercises is really, how do I focus my investment to make sure that there is a payoff, and also that the organization can actually deliver on the vision and on the strategy.
One of the pieces that I think is so interesting is the fact that we're always talking about putting the customer in the center. And why is that so important for digital transformation?
So I think that's a good point. To be honest, in fact, up until a few years ago, if you start a conversation about digital transformation with most executives, you'd end up talking about digital marketing, social media, and this kind of discussion. Primarily because the major focus, I don't know if it's probably not 100%, but certainly a large percentage, maybe 80% of the activity was focused on the front end. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, customers are what the firm's all about. So it's quite right to start with the customers, but I think it's probably missing a big point in terms of the other potential parts of the firm that you need to align. And by that I mean that, you know, for instance, if you take an application for where you're changing the way that you connect with your customer, you know, probably a big part of the work is going to be around the customer experience, but a big part is going to be about how do I deliver on that promise from an operational perspective. And if you think about e-commerce or you know, short-run delivery or the last mile for if you're in the retail industry, these are all operational issues that you have to solve at the back of the customer experience. So the reason mainly that people, in my view, started with customer experience is you know, a good reason, which is you know, how do we really improve the customer experience from this kind of silo delivery that we had, and also because digital has just multiplied the touch points so much that we have, you know, kiosk, loyalty cards, social channel, I mean, you name it. We have, you know, multitude of touch points with a client that it's actually becoming more and more complex to connect in a seamless way with your customers, and hence all these projects and endeavors that we've seen over the last few years around multi-channel integration, because this is an incredible, difficult exercise to do, and I think it's quite right to start with the client. Probably also, you know, as you go in front of your board and ask for investment, it's probably easier if you say it's about customer than if you say it's about something else in your organization. So there's probably that as well. But I think the focus on the customer, for me, it's you know, every transformation that I've seen being successful has always been fairly customer centric and really taking an outside view of the organization, because you know, most industries today are facing a set of clients that are fundamentally changing themselves, and we talk a lot about millennials, but I think it's not just age groups that are changing, so it's not just demographics that drives that, it's actually behavior. So we are seeing you know, and if you look at the research, you will find that demographics is only a good indicator, but you find a very traditional and conservative 30-year-old and very digital savvy 55-year-old. So it cannot be a perfect guide, but so that is really important, because the way that these people want to interact in the firm, want to engage in the firm with firms are fundamentally different, and the more traditional corporation have really got to understand that, to really recalibrate how you want to do banking, or you know, I've been banking with the same bank for 15 years. I love them, and I've never talked to any single employee in all these 15 years, and I'm quite happy with that. So you know, so those are the kind of things that are really changing the way that we connect with our customers.
We have an interesting comment from Arsalan Khan on Twitter, and he's asking, he's pointing out something that I was going to ask you about, which is it fair to say that digital transformation is the business process re-engineering of our time, or is there something different here?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I really like that question, because I actually believe so. I think you have to look at it as a portfolio. So digital re-engineering as bad press. I don't know why, but it has bad press. But I think, yes, a part of digital transformation is about re-engineering. So in other words, if you think about a two-way matrix where on the one hand, you're not really covering the entirety of your value chain. So you're looking maybe at a single department like maintenance, for instance, something like that. And on the other hand, it doesn't really have an impact on your business model. Then you are truly in the world of re-engineering with digital tools. And you know what? There is nothing wrong with that. Actually, I love projects and programs, and I love to see clients who have got a good dose of this kind of re-engineering aspect to it, because that is a route to a faster payback. And it's also the route to raise investment capacity that you can then invest in the things that are truly transformative. So in other words, the things that are much more complex to deliver from the value chain perspective. And I mentioned multi-channel integration, for instance. That covers, you're starting to work right across the silos of organization, or the things that are changing your business model. And if you think about what GE has done with the the industrial internet and Predix, I think that's a good example of a digital transformation that's fundamentally changed the nature of your business, how you go to market, the kind of skill set that you have to hire, and so on and so forth. So I think you have to think about it like a portfolio of activity where some of it will be more re-engineering, some of it will be switching your business model but with not really changing too much. So think about insurance companies selling insurance by the hour on the mobile phone. That's a fundamentally new offering, but it's not really changing your fundamental business model. Then you have the really complex, I would say, cross value chain type of transformation. So if you think about banks and telecom back office system, it's a mind-boggling endeavor to actually start modernizing and automating this kind of system. And then you have the G example I've just taken, where it's complex from a value chain perspective and complex from a business model perspective. And these are the kind of the moonshots and the big bets that people are taking. And I think GE has done if you think about how long they've taken to actually do that, for a company like GE, 4 years is a very short time. So that's an example of an impressive case. But I love the question, because people tend to think always about, it's disruption, we have to change everything. No, I think you have to think every type of this within a big digital transformation. You have different type of programs, and each of them have got a different risk profile, a different investment profile, and a different timeline. And I think it's good to manage it as a portfolio, so you can hedge your bets and your risk and your investments. So
it's very interesting to hear you describe it as a portfolio of activities with their own investment, their own timeline. To what extent are companies making the big bet change that you were talking about at the extreme? I mean, if you read the press, it seems like every other company is completely rethinking their whole business. But I suspect, I was going to say, but I suspect it's not quite.
You're quite right. So I see different types of companies. I think there are companies, you're absolutely right, where we have big discussions around, what if we get disrupted over the next 3 years? We need to change our business model completely. It's going to be a radical change for our capabilities, and so on and so forth. And then when you look at the digital transformation roadmap, it's mainly optimization. It's mainly optimizing the existing and so on. So in other words, there's a gap between the strategic thinking and the actual delivery. So I think so that's one case. I do think that, and this is why I really emphasizing this notion of managing as a portfolio, because you need to have both your eyes on protecting what you've got today. So you're getting attacked in your backyard on a daily basis by all sorts of competitors, being the traditional ones, but also ones you've never heard of, or people that are not even in your industry. So you got to protect that backyard, and at the same time, you have to keep an eye on what is the future state of my organization if I want to be successful in this new world. So you have to have two kind of heads all the time, and to some extent design your programs that way. And hence my point about a portfolio, because the way you tackle then those initiatives are very different. So for instance, let me give you an example. You can if you think this technology might have an impact on your organization, but you're not sure, things like AI or others, or robotics or anything today, or 3D printing, then it's quite okay to have a sort of edge, what I call edge innovation. You have a sandbox or an innovation department that actually talks about this technology, trial them out, see whether it's some application. So this is a long-term process, because it takes a while to nurture those technologies and bring them to the business side. It's also a reasonably limited risk for an organization to do that. If you're in a case where your business model is entirely dependent on an acquisition of skills, for instance, if you're a bank and you have very little data analytics capability today, then your route may be more an acquisition. So, because that's the speed to market becomes essential for your strategy. So the acquisition becomes, a nice way or a quick way, at least, if not, it's not cheap, but a quick way to get access to these skills. Equally, I mentioned earlier on the very complex transformation that some of the industries are contemplating today. You can do it in-house, but you can also greenfield it. So in other words, you could have a few companies are actually doing that as we speak, which is basically, rather than, if I know it's going to take 10 or 15 years for me to change my core systems and my core processes within the firm, then is it not quicker to start with a greenfield operation where I can build a stack which is completely different of new technologies, new processes, targeting a certain segment of client, and then slowly migrate my existing base to that. So I think that's, again, the notion of every piece of the portfolio, as I've described earlier, has got different ways to go to market, whether you have time or not, whether you have money or not, and it includes things like innovation processes that you could put in place, whether it's a fund or a sandbox or an innovation center in California or whatever, or whether it's acquisition or even greenfield. So that's kind of the panoply, I would say, of tools that you can use to actually deliver on that. But the point you made is very valid. You have to do that because you have to keep an eye on what you can optimize today, which is worth doing through technology and this kind of re-engineering aspect, but also the part that's really potentially going to start touching your business model and therefore creating some real danger in your competitive position. And this lot has to be tackled too through acquiring capabilities, understanding where the market is going to end up, and really taking a position early on. The trick that's the most difficult in all of this, and I see most CEOs I talk to really struggle, is everybody talks about disruption, but nobody's putting a timeline on it. So, and for a businessman, if it's all going to collapse or go pear-shaped in 2 years or in 20 years, it has massive different implications, as you can imagine. And I think so part of the strategy part of digital transformation, I think, really needs to crack in a pretty deep and fundamental way. How long are we talking about? So, because if you're, I'll give you an example where this is becomes an impediment, actually. So I see a lot of financial service institutions, for instance, telling me that we are being disrupted left, right, and center by all these startups, and the business is, you listen to them, you think the business is going to collapse tomorrow morning. And then a month later, they publish their results, and it's up 20% on profits, up 10% on sales, or whatever. And therefore, and this is good, but the problem is that there is no way to generate the need and the excitement to actually transform, so there's no pressure from the top. If you're in trouble, it's easy because you're what I call the sort of crisis-induced type of transformation. They're easier because you have a natural enemy, which is your business is degrading very fast. So if you think about the post office business, for instance, it's clear that the letter business is going down like a stone, and it's not going to come back anytime soon. So you have to think about a fundamental shift in your business. If you're in the bank or in pharmaceutical or some of these industry, and your results are great and year on year you're still growing and making good money, then it's harder for maybe not the CEO, but at least to convince a sufficient population of your exec to actually have the empathy and the willingness to really change the organization. So I think this notion of pressure is really important.
So you've been talking about the business and really the human element of transformation. But you mentioned earlier, when we were talking about the components, what is digital transformation, you mentioned earlier about platforms and data. And so we know that technology has some role to play here. And what is the role of tech?
Well, it's huge. I mean, it's huge because so first of all, I think the notion that and it's a notion that I've been fighting against for a long time, that we have technology on one side of the organization and the business on the other is such an old-fashioned concept. I mean, I think we've got to get rid of that as soon as we can. Unfortunately, that's how we designed organization, 90 years ago. And you know that for a very long time, the IT department or the technology department had the virtual monopoly of technology introduction in the firm, and we know that is gone. This world is finished. But it goes further than that. I think the education of executives in organization needs to change. By education, I don't mean your university degree, but what you self-learn personally. It is virtually impossible for in a company to have executives today that are absolutely zero tech savvy competencies. It's impossible because and in the US, I must have at least collected 15 business cards of people whose job it is to be CTO of marketing, and I always said, what the hell is that? And they usually tell me, well, there is so much technology just around the marketing function or just around the automation of marketing tasks that you need to actually start sifting through all of this technology to really truly understand what that can do to your business. So my point is, technology, with a big T, has a role to play at any point of this transformation. It's not going to go away, and I think it's more the opposite. It's more, I think, we're seeing more of a fusion between IT and the business side, where IT people have got to be much more educated around the business challenges and the business strategies that the company is trying to do. So become business people. And equally, the business people, the business side, has got to be much more attuned to what technology can do for them. It doesn't mean, by the way, that each are going to replace each other. That's not what I mean. But I think there needs to be a lot more communication, a lot more cross-functional collaboration between these two teams, and therefore the leveling, even the language to be able to communicate is important. And it goes absolutely, the best company I've seen in the research where companies where the business people were totally okay to have a technology conversation, and the IT guys were totally okay to have a conversation about channel strategy. And that's where you want to end up at, is people that are really, because there is the world where, with a few exceptions in maybe systems of records, but the world where we were having technology, developing in a dark corner, all this kind of stuff, and making sure that the lights are switched on is over. I mean, if you want to succeed in digital technology today or in digital transformation, these two worlds have absolutely got to fuse. And I must have done 55 or 60 projects, which were usually titled, how do we align IT with a business strategy? Okay. I think this is, again, over. It's not about alignment. It's really about fusion. And the way that you deliver these projects has got to be with a cross-functional, multi-skilled team that includes IT, creatives, marketing people, supply chain people, and so on. So we really have to sort of, to some extent, we're breaking down some of the natural barriers that we've built in organization over the years. And this is, as you know, in large organizations, very hard to do. So back to your question, technology with a big T is to me 100% component part of digital transformation, and the IT groups within that, or the CTO groups within that, absolutely have got to play their part. You cannot do digital transformation properly without the complete collaboration of these communities. And I know a few companies have tried, and I've seen very, very few succeeding without actually involving the technology side of the business.
I want to remind everybody that you are listening to CXOTalk. I'm Michael Krigsman, an industry analyst and the host of CXOTalk. And our guest today is Didier Bonnet, who is a senior executive with Capgemini Consulting and truly one of the pioneers writing and researching digital transformation. So Didier, you were just talking about the need for business people to understand tech and technologists to understand the business. But when you have this kind of environment, what actually is the appropriate role for IT? In the best organizations that you've seen, what's the role of IT?
Right. So in the organization that I've seen, we were really successful at digital transformation. I think, first of all, I will go back to a leitmotif of our research and the book, which is leadership plays a massive role. So you just have to look at the leaders and some of the leaders that I see who are CIOs or CTOs driving or helping to drive this transformation are people that are absolutely understood what this transformation is about, understood that the way that you deliver, the way that you experiment in the digital environment is very different, and are absolutely part of not only the delivery of the system, but the conceptualization of the business problem and the business solution. So you do have to have a different mindset. I have also seen the opposite. I've seen people that have stayed in their traditional model of IT delivery, and I personally don't think there's a great future for these type of leaders, because I think the world has moved on. But equally, I think we've gone a little bit too far sometimes in the press, where I see a lot of this talk about bimodal IT and dual speed IT, and as like the panacea of everything. I'm always a bit careful, because I think I've seen CIO actually running bimodal type IT within the IT department very effectively. So it's not a matter of taking out some responsibility from IT and putting it somewhere else, whether it's in marketing or somewhere else. It's more about, can we actually have these dual demands of, on the one hand, having some systems which are absolutely fundamental to the corporation, being run with 100% safety, 100% reliability. If you think about the back office of a bank, for instance, or a transaction processing system, and that is not going to change. You're still going to have this level of utmost security and delivery. But on the other hand, you have a more, I would say, untraditional type of IT, where you're doing a lot of piloting, a lot of proof of concept, a lot of data capture, so you can actually trial many more experiments, and then if they work, scale them. If they don't work, throw them out and move on. And the type of competence of people that you put in these two boxes are very different. The type of IT, as you know, delivery process, delivery methods that you use are very different. And I was promised myself that I would not mention the word agile, but I've just done it. So you know what I mean. But so all this is very different. However, it doesn't mean that they have to be separated from the technology function. I've seen cases where it's worked extremely well when it stayed within the IT department, because the technology leaders had the perspective, the view, and the vision to say, yeah, I get what you're trying to do, I understand, and I will reshape my IT department very, very different. Equally, we've seen examples where the IT leadership stays in this traditional mode of everything you say, it ends up with a 2 or 3 months of requirements gathering with the business, and that doesn't work. So people have recreated IT function or digital IT function separate from the traditional IT. So you don't have to do it. It just depends the kind of leadership and competence and capabilities you have within the IT function. And that's why you've also seen propping up digital divisions or digital development units all over the place, is really to try to capture that kind of new developments that is absolutely essential to the world of digital. But I don't think there's a silver bullet that says it should be in IT, or we should throw away all the old IT and start with, you need both, and you need a little bit of you need a lot of leadership from both sides, the business and the technology, to really figure out what is the best solution for your particular organization. Because, for instance, and the for your particular organization can be very cultural. So if you're a highly decentralized organization and you're building a very centric and centralized type of IT, digital IT solution, it's very hard to make it work. So you have to really figure out how the organization is constructed, what's the culture of the organization, how people work, how it's structured, in order to do effectively this kind of IT development and digital development.
We have an interesting question from Shelley Lucas on Twitter. And we always talk about the best practices with high-performing organizations. And Shelley's asking, is there something that you have seen that, in relation to digital transformation out in the field, that just shocked you?
Yes, there's many. I've seen so a few shocking things. I'll tell you the main one, and it was a surprise to me. I've always had an eye on the human aspect of this change, for obvious reason, and because I've studied organization for a long time, I know that organization is just a collection of people at the end, and if you don't get the people aligned and engaged, nothing will happen. So I spend quite a bit of time trying to understand, how is it that we are currently facing one of the biggest skill change or skill improvement or skill uplift in our corporation. Certainly the biggest I've seen in my career, where we all have to make an effort within an organization to really challenge ourselves, to reskill ourselves, whether you're in marketing or in technology or anywhere. And yet I've very rarely seen the HR departments in large organizations being in the game, or at least in the driving seat. That was one of the big shocks for me. And and there's a few exceptions, and I've seen a couple of firms where HR was really taking on the baton. Usually, the people that were caring were the operations people, the COO or the CIO, or the people that really understood that, oh my God, we got to get the people with us, or we got to upskill the whole marketing department to be able to handle those digital capability, or we don't have any. We talk about analytics, but we don't have any data scientists to speak of. So where do we get them? So that kind of stuff. So this skill change is really important, but mainly was driven by the business. And I think my plea to corporation is we have to really, rather than counting the number of days holidays, there's a bigger problem. There's a problem that needs to be tackled, which is how do we mass scale? And we're talking about scale sometimes of hundreds of thousands of people. How do we mass scale our population? Because otherwise, you will end up, which is happening already in some firm, with a kind of two-speed community. So it's not two-speed IT anymore, but it's two-speed community of people who get it and people who don't. And there are plenty of things that and when I say HR, it's not. I'm not pointing the finger at the department or anything. It's largely the people who care about the development of the people within an organization and being able to design programs that really reskill the organization. And of course, it's about hiring and training, but it's also about incubating. It's about partnering. It's about doing reverse mentoring program. Whatever tools you can use, there's a whole panoply of them that you need, or building your own transformation university, which many companies are doing right now. So it's using this tool to really skill en masse your population. Because if one of the findings we had from the research was when you ask corporation, what is the biggest impediment to you accelerating your transformation, your digital transformation? In 80% of the case, or 77% of the case, the answer was capabilities and skills, people. So we got to tackle that problem because it's not going to go away. And we don't have the luxury of waiting until all the people who are not skilled retire and then we hire new ones. So I really, my plea to the community in HR is really to rebuild. We used to call them in the old days organizational development, management development people who really get the business side of upskilling of an organization. And I think these people need to come out or be hired to really support the transformation, because the business is already overloaded with digital initiatives and transformation, and we really need support from every function in the firm. So that was a big surprise for me during the research. The other one was a number of people that would say, then I'm talking now the CEOs mainly, who would say, yes, digital transformation is really important, but I will wait until my competitors move, or I will wait until something else happens and be a fast follower. And the number of people, or delegating, or saying, oh yeah, I put one guy on the job to look after digital transformation, and you find out the person is level -5 in the organization. So from the start that this is not going to work. So this lack of awareness, and I think it's getting better with the years, but this lack of awareness of what we're talking about here, which is not another fad, another technology fad that's going to go away in 2 years, but something that's really profoundly going to change the shape and the operation of your organization. So those would be the two main ones.
We have just a few minutes left. Now, where does all of this go? Where is the future of digital transformation. And maybe you can give us a glimpse into some of the research topics that you're focused on next, because I know you're beginning your research and your writing cycle, authoring cycle. So where are we going?
So yeah, so this is a question I get all the time. It says, Didier, you keep talking about digital transformation, but surely now everything is digital, so we should stop talking about digital transformation. And I wish it were true. Unfortunately, it isn't. I think on balance, I think very, very few corporations have really truly transformed to the point where they are totally at ease with integrating all this technology. And second, the flow of technology is just not going to stop. So whether we like it or not, and I have a lot of clients saying, "Oh, I wish this technology would just stop for 2 or 3 years so we can integrate all this, and then we'll see the next wave." But that ain't going to happen. So we're going to see more advanced technology coming on board. The cycle time between research, prototyping in the labs, and going into the business world is reducing. I mean, think about 3D printing. I mean, we're getting composite material 3D printed nowadays, and it's already being trialed out in the business world. So really reducing cycle time. So I think this agility. It's a bit like running a marathon. You need to do a lot of digital transformation because it helps you to stay the course of the flow of all this technology. So where is it going? I think for the firms that are really, I would say, at the forefront, the firms that we call digital master in the book, I think what you're starting to see is fundamental change in the way that this corporation actually work. And they're around, not just the digital mindset, but the way that, for instance, the organization is flattening. And I'm not a believer of a completely flat organization with no boss or anything. I don't buy that. But you do see the organization flattening. You do see a lot more decision power through analytics coming closer to where the client decision is being made, or where the important decisions are being made, because you can at the same time delegate power, but also control through data. So that is happening, and therefore the decision-based, database decision making is becoming more of a way of operating for these kind of firms, and you're seeing also a lot of automation happening, which has got positive implication for productivity and efficiency, but also some pretty negative implications for staff and employment, which we're going to have to tackle. So I think there's a layer of fundamental organizational change that is happening to corporation, which is starting to change the shape of these 19-year-old organization that we designed basically on the military model, where information was cascading top down. They were middle manager and all this kind of stuff. So I think we're seeing a crumbling of that. It's very hard to figure out, well, what's the end game. So we try to put some flesh around that with the MIT to try to get at least some directions as to where the organization are going. But it's very, very hard to figure out, where is the end game. But it's fundamentally going to change even the way that we structured functions within the firm, I believe. And then the second part of where the future is going is, I think we've got to. I'm a firm believer that we have to really recreate and reinvent corporate innovation. One of the things that large firms are always scared by startups. It's always startups that are going to eat your lunch, and you get, suddenly tomorrow, 200,000 people insurance organization is going to die being killed by 2 guys and a dog in San Francisco. Maybe, but I think the corporation can fight back. There's one lever that corporation can use is scale. Because that's what, if you talk to startups, that's what they want. They want scale, they want geographical spread, they want distribution channels. So it's how we need to really fundamentally reinvent the way that corporate actually do innovation. And it's quite a complex endeavor because it touches not just the creativity. The problem with innovation is not ideas. Everybody's focusing on ideas, but that's the least of the problem. You can get ideas from everywhere. The problem is then, how do I get my idea to a business application through through my organization, through prototyping, through testing, through experimentation, and then being able to scale. So today, I think quite a few corporations have got the idea of, or I've got the concept of, I get the point where I can see and conceptualize a solution and then drive it down proof of concept. That's a lot of companies are doing that. But I still see clients that have got the proof of concept running for 2 or 3 years because they can't scale it. There is no process within an organization to scale it, no capabilities to do so. So I really believe that the two frontiers that we're looking at right now, one is this notion of how is the shape of the organization going to change once our organization are very transparent, very data-driven, and so on and so forth. And therefore, what is it that we need and don't need in this new world to actually operate this organization? And second, how do we actually use our scale to really completely reinvent the way that corporations actually do innovation? And it's not about talking to free startups. I mean, open innovation and digital innovation is not about talking to startup or taking your board to Silicon Valley to meet with Google and Apple. That helps on the cultural side, but you really need to fundamentally change some of the processes, systems, and culture within your organization to really drive this change, and in particular being able to scale, because the scaling is where the business case lies, not in the prototype. Sorry, I'm being passionate, but those are two topics, by the way, that we're starting to research with the MIT right now.
Wow. Well, you have given us an incredible amount of advice, and this time has gone by so quickly. So I would like to thank Didier Bonnet, who is the Senior Vice President and Global Practice Leader for Capgemini Consulting, for taking the time and speaking with us today. Didier, thank you.
Thank you.
You have been watching episode number 205 of CXOTalk. Next week, there is no show because of Thanksgiving here in the US, but we'll be back the following week, and I hope you'll join us. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great day.